This is Neikk Prakken. He's going to tell you a little bit about the heart. He's my advisor from the Netherlands. So whatever he tells, I should more or less know. He works at the University Medical Center Groningen. He's going to tell you a little bit about standard cardiac problems. You know, Mark?
Yeah, so if you have questions afterwards, ask Mark. Well, thank you for the introduction. This will be recorded as I understood, so I hope that it goes well. Let me tell you something about cardiac MRI. I will tell some general stuff since probably you don't see MRI every day from the heart, that is. And I'm going to tell something about what's going to be the new normal. And afterwards, I hope you understand a bit of it, and otherwise ask away. Well, this is an MRI image of the heart. I have to explain some of it. This is a four-chamber, it's called, because this is the left ventricle. This is the right ventricle. This is the right atrium. This is a bit of the aortic notch. It's a bit of the left ventricle outflow tract, and this is the left atrium. And here something is wrong, really wrong. Does everyone understand the image a bit? Yeah, okay, great. Because what's going on here, this is the left ventricle wall. It's contracting still, but the basal wall, there's something not contracting. This is a big thrombus in the left ventricle wall after an infarction. So the original wall is gone, and there's fibrosis and a big thrombus. So this is a clear-cut case. Something is amiss with the heart. I have another case. It's also a four-chamber of the heart. The left ventricle, the mitral valve here, and the left atrium. Does anyone know what this is, except for the cardiologists in our midst? Well, it's like a snowball or a Christmas ball in the left atrium, and it's called a cardiac myxoma. It's relatively benign, but if it gets loose, it has a little tail attached to the atrial septum. And if it gets loose, it can cause a large embolism. You don't want that. This is another case, also the four-chamber image. Here you can see hypertrophy of the septum. It's also clear-cut. So it's hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's mostly septal. Then another case, also clear-cut, also four-chamber of the heart. You can see here an enlarged left ventricle, the mitral valve, and you can see here it's gushing a bit to the left atrium, so there's mitral insufficiency. So this is a type of dilated cardiomyopathy. There's a bit of fluid in the lungs here. You can see it there. So clear-cut. This case is a little bit less clear-cut. It's also a four-chamber of the heart of another patient. And you can see the left ventricle is dilated. There's a bit of valve insufficiency as well, not very much. This is a case of dilating cardiomyopathy. And this is even less clear-cut, so maybe you can see where I'm getting at, because clear-cut cases are not the issue in my talk. So it's not quite well contracting. There's insufficiency of the mitral valve and tricuspid valve. But, well, if this were an athlete, for example, would it be abnormal or not? Do we really know? So, a patient goes to the doctor with complaints of chest pain or unrest or a feeling of arrhythmia. What do you do? Well, you can do a physical examination. You can ask for the complaints if they're characteristic of cardiac disease or not. You can do an electrocardiogram. You can do exercise testing with exercise EKG or ultrasound. And sometimes then you still do not know what is amiss. You don't have a clear-cut case. And what do you do? If patients are under 40, they can die suddenly during exercise, for example, and the cause can be a cardiomyopathy. If the patients are over 40, it's more probable that they have coronary problems. So coronary artery disease is the biggest problem in patients aged over 40 years. It's 80% of the major adverse events in the heart. But what I'm interested in is in the young group. They die suddenly playing football, for example, and that's the first symptom. So what can you do to screen those people with complaints? You don't know what is amiss. You do cardiac MRI because you get anatomy, function, and a bit of tissue characterization. When you suspect them for coronary disease, you do CT because it's quick, high resolution, and it rules out coronary artery disease if you have no plaque or calcifications. Well, when they come in the department of radiology, we do a cardiac MRI scan, and then we have to say, well, this heart is okay, or is not okay. There's probable cardiomyopathy or something else amiss. But then you have to know what is the reference, what is normal, what's the normal size of the heart, what is the normal mass of the heart muscle, what is the normal function. And you have to think of two principles. One principle, general principle, is concentric hypertrophy. That is seen in strength type athletes, so weightlifters. It's seen in anabolic steroid use. It's seen in hypertension. It's of course seen in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. You've seen an example of that. So clear-cut cases, it's easy, but the not so clear-cut cases are the issue. And next to that, there are more and more people with overweight or obesity. They show hypertrophy as well. And there are people with diabetes. We don't know exactly what's happening, but there's probably some hypertrophy in there. And the metabolic syndrome. The metabolic syndrome is overweight, hypertension, and diabetes, and other diseases. And then the other principle is eccentric hypertrophy, otherwise dilatation. So there's overlap in two ways for cardiomyopathy. You can also see this dilatation in endurance type athletes. So that is the athlete's heart again. Anabolic steroid use maybe. Hypertension, overweight, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. So there is a gray area of no clear-cut cases. And this area is increasingly a problem. It's known for the athlete's heart. Of course, when you do a lot of training, the heart enlarges in volume and mass. But there's another group of athletes, and it's growing. It's a group of endemic diseases, and it's called overweight and obesity. And I looked it up for the United States. It's the Fat Stats 2018. Yeah. Well, 38% are obese, and including overweight, 71%. So that's an increasing problem. And hypertension, it's already 34%. And it's in a relatively young group. And the metabolic syndrome is already 33% in women, a bit more than in men. So it's an increasing population. We don't really have cutoff values for what is the reference of a normal person with overweight and when is it overweight and dilating cardiomyopathy, or overweight and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or something else. We really don't know that for sure. To give you an example, we did another study in athletes and controls, of which some used anabolic steroids. I picked them out of the newspapers when they were found out. So it's a bit tricky. It's never published, but I'll tell it to you now. So you can see here the numbers, but I quickly go to the percentages. So non-athletes, they are the reference in this study. We have strength type athletes, well, they show a bit increase in the heart volume and in the mass, but not very much. They're only weightlifters. But if they have used anabolic steroids, and that's a large group, they admit easily. So there are 18 patients in this study, and they show an increase in heart volume, and much more so in heart muscle mass, as in skeletal muscle mass is logical. Then you have the endurance athlete group. They show both increase in volume and in mass. That's normal. And the more you train, the more you increase. That's also normal. This is body surface area corrected data. But if you use steroids, you can see it's an enormous increase. So these are cyclists, for example. So that does something to your heart. These are the differences in percentages. So you have to take into account the sport, the athlete, and the use of anabolic steroids. It's a strength type theory and endurance type theory proved. If you use anabolic steroids, we also know it's increase in mass and increase in volume. But we don't have this data for obesity yet, or hypertension or diabetes. This is another case. It's a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and I showed you the 4-chamber images already. Here in the upper left, you have the 4-chamber, left ventricle, right ventricle, and you can easily see this is not right. It's a septal hypertrophy. This is the diastolic phase, and this is the systolic phase. It becomes more and more obvious. And the other image, this one you haven't seen yet, it's the delayed enhancement image, and it shows fibrosis because the GAD goes to the interstitium, and the interstitial space is enlarged. So it ends up there, and it really shows how much fibrosis is there. And this is the short axis image, so it's 90 degrees to the other one. And it shows it even more. It's large areas of fibrosis in the hypertrophic area. That was HCM. This is a form of dilating cardiomyopathy. It's arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, and you see here the diastolic image. Nothing seems amiss, but the right ventricle is a bit enlarged. And here is the systolic phase, and you see this dyskinetic bulging of the right ventricular free wall, and this is the correlation with the late GAD enhancement. There's all fibrosis here. So it's all clear cut. Here the 2-chamber left below, and here's all the fibrosis. So you have different patterns in a different image that characterize disease. This is another clear-cut case of late enhancement pattern, because where the fibrosis is, it says something of the type of disease. This is subendocardial fibrosis on the left. It says it's ischemic in origin, so it's a person with coronary artery disease after infarction. This is intramural, so it has another origin, for example, sarcoid disease or myocarditis. And this is subepicardial, and it has even different etiology like myocarditis or Fabry or Chagas or sarcoid. So you have to look where the fibrosis is, Then a colleague from Australia, André Lagerche, studied his own heart, 20 years an athlete, and the hearts of other long-time athletes. So it's a long-time effect of sports, intensive sports, top sport. And they show fibrosis as well. It's also intramurally at certain points, and it's patchy. So is the athlete's heart healthy? Well, maybe not, but it will be researched, of course. This is another example. It's not fibrosis, but fat infiltration. It's of another ARVC patient. We can depict the fatty infiltration in the right ventricular wall as a sign of disease. It's a T1 weight image. Then we can also make T2 weight images to show edema in the heart, for example, in active myocarditis. If it's sudden onset, you have all this moisture as a reaction, as an inflammatory reaction, and a bit of fibrosis. And this is from another article. You can follow this, so you can make an MRI after 6 weeks or 12 weeks, and you see the edema decreasing and the fibrosis is less. So you can also monitor disease using tissue characterization. Well, this is all well known, but we're now moving more and more to tissue mappings, T1 mapping, T2 mapping, T2 star mapping. The microphone went off. So that's the field more and more, and it's not eyeballing anymore, but knowing the values. So you can segment the heart in the AHA 16 segments and analyze per segment what is the value of the T1, T2, or T2 star. And this way you can know if there's muscle or fat or protein or fibrosis in the heart and where it is. And if it's clear cut, you don't really need it. You can prove that the system works. But if you don't really know it, you can calculate it and then give a risk percentage of something is amiss or not. This is another example from literature. It's normal HCM and DCM, and it clearly shows that the corresponding maps confirm the fibrosis. This is another example. Well, okay, we've seen all this. Then back to the basics. At the start of the talk, I said, well, you need to know the function of the heart, the volume, and the mass. And you have a patient in front of you, or it's an athlete or an obese patient. He or she has complaints. You have an MRI scan, and you cannot find anything conclusive. There's no real fibrosis. The function is maybe okay. The heart is maybe a bit big, but I don't exactly know if it's too big or not. So now you need the data. Well, the study that has been done is in athletes, and it confirmed that, like Barry Marin did here in the United States of a large group of athletes over 30 years period, the body surface area has the most impacts. It's 45%, so that's determined by how much you weigh and how long you are, and you put it in Dubois and Dubois formula, and it corrects 45% of the cardiac volume. Training hours, gender, heart rate, training type, and training durations are factors, and age is also a factor. How the older you get, the smaller the heart becomes. It's probably because you cannot train. There are no Olympic athletes of 70 years of age yet. The normal adaptation is balanced in athletes, so you can know if the heart is large, you correct it for all these factors. If the ejection fractions are equal, if the stroke volume is equal and the heart rate is low, it's probably just an athlete. If the atria are similarly of size, it's all good. And if you get a discrepancy in the balance, you can think of a disease, like this example. Well, We have this data of athletes. It's on a website, referencecmr.com. So a clinician can look up the data when he scored his MRI. So you have to quantify your MRI and look up the data. But what we don't have is obesity, hypertension, and diabetes data. So we started another study funded by the Heart Foundation of the Netherlands, and we include people, men and women, with obesity, hypertension, diabetes, or controls from 80 to 40 years of age, so the young population, and scan them all for volume, mass, and function analysis. And we do the T1 mapping and the other mappings. We do wall strain analysis, microvessel architecture analysis, and elasticity measurements. So we know the reference for normal, non-diseased hearts, and then the next study will be to check this data against people who have a cardiac disease. And we also do big studies to improve on sequences we are developing. And then, well, we hopefully get reference data for the endemic population, so we can say if someone comes with complaints, if it's due to their weight or hypertension or cardiomyopathy. That's really what it is about. The data will be accessible through the website, referencecmr.com, which are the control data and athlete values are already there, so it will be added to that. And we will validate new imaging techniques and develop new sequences. So that's about what I'm doing.